Ryan Park had already devoured a 300-year-old immortal, shattered Asterra's S-rank ceiling, and unlocked a void rank the system was never built to recognize. But months earlier, he had been the weakest contracted beast in Asterra, an F- slime rat that kids used as tutorial fodder. The ridiculous part was that Ryan remembered exactly how this happened, because before reincarnating, he designed broken monster evolution systems for a living. His last project featured the Void Devourer, a final boss built to eat spells, ignore restrictions, and punish anyone who trusted the rules too much. Now, that same mechanic seemed to be growing inside his tiny rat body, one hidden evolution at a time. If Ryan wanted to keep his new tamer alive, he would eventually have to become the same rule-breaking monster he once designed. That is the story we're breaking down today, from trash tier pet to a beast that literally eats the system. Before we jump in, hit like and subscribe if you enjoy full story manhwa recaps with broken skills, hidden evolutions, and zero filler. Alright, let's start from the exact moment Ryan's new life went completely off meta. 1 second, he was a 27-year-old mobile RPG systems designer in Seattle, exhausted, over-caffeinated, and arguing with final boss balance notes. Lightning flashed outside his apartment while instant noodles cooled beside his keyboard, and Ryan barely had time to look up before everything went black. When sound returned, unfamiliar voices thundered above him, stone floors chilled his paws, and something sticky covered most of his new body. Ryan's first discovery was brutally simple. He was tiny, four-legged, disgusting, and sitting inside a glowing summoning circle. Panic lasted maybe 30 seconds before his developer brain took over and began treating reality like an untested game build. The enormous hall looked like a high-budget beast academy, with floating lamps, stone arches, summoning platforms, and nervous students lined in rows. Teenagers stood beside newly contracted beasts ranging from armored lions to wyverns, while instructors recorded every summon with bureaucratic seriousness. Ryan looked down at himself again and realized most creatures in the room could probably one-shot him by stepping backward. His body looked like a sewer rat merged with spilled gelatin, translucent slime hanging from limbs that seemed offensively underspec. Before he could complain to the cosmic dev team, a trembling voice above him broke into quiet sobs. The girl inside his circle was 15-year-old Mia Reed, a scholarship student whose academy coat still looked slightly too large for her shoulders. Judging from every face around them, summoning Ryan had just nuked whatever future the academy expected Mia to have. An instructor stared at the result, checked his crystal twice, then announced the classification with the sympathy normally reserved for funerals. Slime rat, F-, a species considered below standard F-rank pets, and barely useful and for beginner combat drills. Ryan immediately hated the label because someone had apparently looked at the lowest official rank and decided even that was too generous. Around Mia, students whispered, while their own beasts shifted proudly beside them, some carrying classifications as high as C rank. In Asterra, those letters were not just combat stats. They shaped education, career access, clan status, and sometimes entire family fortunes. An S-rank divine beast could elevate a household into nobility, while an F-rank companion could bury a teenager's future before graduation. So Mia was not crying because Ryan looked ugly, although he privately admitted she would have been justified on aesthetic grounds. She was crying because everyone around her believed one unlucky summon had permanently branded her as trash tier 2. The laughter started quietly, then spread when students realized exactly what species had appeared inside Mia's once promising summoning circle. Someone called slime rats tutorial mobs, the kind beginners used when learning how to kill contracted creatures without getting hurt. Ryan froze at that description because reincarnation suddenly sounded less like a second chance and more like forced participation in the tutorial zone. Mia lowered her head as another student showed off a young Drake surrounded by proud teachers and approving classmates. The difference was brutal. One student stood beside a future battle mount, while Mia tried not to cry beside sentient magical sludge. Ryan wanted to file a complaint with whatever god assigned starter builds, but then something far more interesting appeared inside his mind. He could remember everything, from Seattle to years of balance sheets, evolution trees, hidden classes, exploit reports, and broken patch notes. His human memories had not faded, and his ability to analyze systems felt strangely sharp, despite occupying a brain smaller than his fist. Ryan tested simple thoughts, recalled old formulas, reconstructed upgrade logic, and concluded that his consciousness remained completely intact. If this world obeyed measurable rules, then having garbage-based stats did not automatically mean he had a losing build. Developers knew better than players that the nastiest skills were often hidden inside interactions nobody thought to test. Mia finally crouched beside him, uncertain whether she should touch the creature everyone else considered an embarrassment. Ryan looked up at her red eyes and immediately recognized a variable more important than rarity, stats, or whatever system governed Asterra. She had not rejected him, even after being humiliated in front of an entire hall packed with classmates and instructors. Her hand hesitated above his head before gently touching the slime, and Ryan discovered that being petted as a rat was deeply humiliating. More importantly, a faint pulse moved through his body the instant Mia's fingers made contact, suggesting their contract was already doing something strange. Ryan concentrated on the sensation and sensed an invisible structure linking them, almost like a background process waiting for meaningful input. He could not see a clean status window, yet the logic felt familiar enough to make his old systems designer instincts immediately suspicious. If everyone believed species determined destiny, Ryan wanted to know who wrote the rule, and whether the rule had an exception. Handler? Mia whispered an apology to him, ashamed that she could not summon something stronger, which offended Ryan for an entirely different reason. From his perspective, she had done nothing wrong. The bad design was a society that treated random summoning like permanent account ranking. Ryan made a private decision while sitting in a puddle of his own slime beneath the academy lights. He would treat this world like a system to beat. If Mia had pulled the weakest pet in Asterra, then he would simply become the most broken, weakest pet anyone had ever seen. The declaration sounded heroic inside his head, but the noise escaping his actual mouth was a pathetic little squeak. Mia blinked, wiped her face, and carefully lifted him, apparently interpreting the sound as an attempt to comfort her. Ryan accepted the misunderstanding because correcting her meant explaining sentience, reincarnation, another world, and several problems he preferred delaying. The ceremony continued, but Ryan stopped caring about flashy beasts because every demonstration around him was free information about Asterra's meta. He watched how contracts reacted, how mana moved through summoned creatures, and how instructors described the 7 recognized ranks from F through S. F, E, D, C, B, A, and finally S formed the accepted ladder, with S-rank creatures treated like divine-class raid bosses. Yet something bothered Ryan about the explanations, because they sounded less like biology and more like structured progression rules. Teachers spoke about thresholds, compatibility, locked potential, evolution, materials, and awakening conditions using language painfully familiar to Ryan. That similarity proved nothing by itself, but Ryan had survived enough broken builds to respect coincidences that repeated too often. While Mia waited for staff to finish documenting her disaster summon, Ryan began stress testing his new body's senses. His distance vision was weak, his hearing was annoying, and every magical object nearby produced a faint taste he could somehow detect. The sensation was impossible to describe normally, because Ryan was not smelling mana or seeing it. He was tasting its structure. That discovery redirected his attention toward a small blue fragment lying near the edge of another student's summoning platform. It looked like an ordinary magic stone chipped during the ceremony, insignificant enough that nobody bothered retrieving it. Ryan stared at the fragment while Mia remained distracted, then calculated the risk of testing an obviously terrible idea. His body was nearly useless, meaning normal training would leave him stat-checked by stronger species before progression even started. Therefore, he needed a cheat route, and cheat routes were rarely discovered through responsible behavior. Ryan slipped from Mia's arms with all the dignity available to a dripping rat, and scurried toward the fallen stone. Mia noticed too late and quietly chased him, while teachers continued debating whether her summon should be reconsidered. The stone pulsed with concentrated mana, and every instinct in Ryan's new body warned that eating it was not normal animal behavior. His human instincts agreed, but his developer instincts reminded him that hidden mechanics usually rewarded players willing to click suspicious objects. Ryan bit the stone before common sense could organize a stronger argument, forcing the cold fragment between unexpectedly sharp teeth. Mia stared in horror while Ryan chewed something no slime rat should consider food under any reasonable build, wondering if her new pet was already broken. The fragment dissolved against his tongue, turning from crystal into a stream of energy that disappeared through his body. Ryan waited for transformation, enlightenment, death, or at least magical food poisoning, but nothing visible happened. His fur remained damp, his slime remained humiliating, and his combat value still looked equal to an angry kitchen sponge. Mia scooped him up before he could search for another stone, clearly deciding her defective pet had already developed dangerous eating habits. Ryan considered the experiment a fail until an unfamiliar pressure flickered behind his consciousness like a notification refusing to stay hidden. Then the message arrived clearly enough to stop every analytical thought in his head. The message was brutally clear: anomaly detected, absorption successful, and an unidentified evolution route had just opened inside Ryan's trash-tier body. Ryan did not celebrate immediately because years in development had taught him that mysterious notifications often preceded catastrophic bugs. He repeated the wording mentally, focusing on absorption rather than evolution, because that implied the stone itself had become usable input. Ordinary slime rats were not supposed to eat mana, yet his body had processed the fragment and triggered a hidden response. That meant his species description was incomplete, intentionally misleading, or being overridden by something the ranking system could not read. Ryan's attention shifted from his embarrassing appearance to the invisible possibilities hiding inside it. He had spent years building evolution trees around obscure triggers, weird materials, emotional requirements, and interactions casual players never found. If Asterra followed similar logic, then the weakest starter might simply have the hardest hidden evolution route buried behind conditions nobody tested. The idea sounded ridiculous, but so did dying to lightning and respawning as magical vermin with a memory full of game systems. Mia held him against her chest while adults debated her future nearby, unaware her trash pet had just unlocked an impossible path. Ryan listened as Academy staff discussed standard replacement procedures for failed summons, hoping to learn what normally happened next. Their language made clear that F-rank outcomes were rare at Crownspire Academy and serious enough to justify administrative intervention. Several instructors believed Mia should receive another creature, effectively re-rolling the summon before the result ruined her academic record. Ryan initially approved because being replaced would free Mia from ridicule, but another detail immediately killed that option. The contract mark on Mia's hand remained active, glowing faintly whenever Ryan moved too far from her. Whatever had bound them during the ceremony had already recognized him as her companion, and the connection felt deeper than temporary ownership. Ryan sensed Mia's sadness through that bond in faint pulses, each wave producing a strange warmth beneath his slimy skin. He could not read her thoughts, but fear, embarrassment, and stubborn attachment traveled across the connection with uncomfortable clarity. The emotional feedback unsettled Ryan more than reincarnation, because it made Mia's humiliation feel partially like his own. He had entered this world thinking like a dev testing mechanics, yet the system had connected him to a real teenager. That meant every experiment Ryan ran could affect someone who had never asked to become part of his new build. He quietly revised his priorities, placing survival first and Mia's future close enough behind that the difference barely mattered. When Mia finally carried him away from the platform, students kept laughing at the creature, leaving slime across her sleeve. Ryan memorized every reaction without getting angry because mockery was useful information about how completely everyone trusted ranking labels. If nobody expected anything from him, nobody would notice small upgrades until those upgrades became impossible to dismiss. Being underestimated was not a disadvantage to a developer who had spent years hiding broken mechanics behind harmless UI. Outside the main chamber, Mia sat alone on a stone bench while celebrations continued for students with better summons. Her classmates were meeting impressive beasts, posing for pictures, and imagining glorious futures, while Mia stared at Ryan like an apology made physical. Ryan tried another reassuring squeak and received a tiny laugh through her tears, which he counted as his first social win as vermin. That laugh also produced another warm pulse through their contract, stronger than the sadness he had felt earlier. Ryan immediately noticed the difference because emotional intensity seemed to create measurable responses inside his body. He could not yet tell whether those responses were energy, experience, or bond points, but they were definitely not random. Mia's emotions were interacting with him. The magic stone had unlocked absorption, and the official system understood neither phenomena. 3 unknown mechanics in his first hour meant Ryan was no longer dealing with ordinary reincarnation. He was dealing with a system, and systems could be studied, manipulated, exploited, and occasionally demolished by anyone patient enough. The difference was that failure here would not trigger a reload screen, leaving Ryan unusually motivated to test carefully. He began with harmless experiments, moving farther from Mia and watching the contract tighten before relaxing when he returned. He tried touching traces of mana left on the academy floor, but physical contact alone produced nothing like the earlier absorption. He nibbled harmless residue and felt only a weak response, suggesting the hidden root cared about quality, quantity, or some condition beyond raw mana. Most importantly, he watched Mia closely because every emotional shift changed, the warmth flowing through their bond in a noticeably different way. Embarrassment tightened the connection, relief softened it, and moments when Mia defended him made the shared energy flare with unexpected intensity. Ryan began suspecting their contract was not just ownership magic, but one of the hidden progression resources driving his impossible evolution route. The possibility fascinated the designer inside him and horrified the remaining human part, because he refused to farm a teenager's misery for EXP. He noticed sadness created energy, but relief, affection, trust, and even laughter generated similar reactions. The system did not appear to reward pain specifically, it collected emotionally meaningful experiences shared through the bond. That distinction mattered because Ryan refused to become a monster that needed his tamer miserable just to level up. The Academy Council met the next morning, expecting a simple correction, because administrators loved problems that could be solved with paperwork and routine procedures. Mia arrived, carrying Ryan against her chest, while he privately judged every adult by how confidently they misunderstood his species. The council explained that receiving an F- creature could permanently damage Mia's placement inside Crownspire. Their proposed fix sounded merciful on paper: return the slime rat, perform another summon, and give Mia a companion worthy of her talent. Mia looked relieved for 1 second before an examiner placed a crystal above her contract mark and immediately frowned. The crystal flashed, dimmed, then repeated the same result 3 times, forcing the examiner to redo the procedure with growing discomfort. Mia's contract was already permanently bound, meaning Ryan could not simply be returned like a defective magical item. The moment those words landed, Ryan felt Mia's fear surge through their connection so sharply that his entire body warmed. The council tried several approved cancellation methods, but every one failed without weakening the bond between girl and beast. Ryan found that fascinating because low-tier creatures were supposed to produce weak contracts, yet theirs behaved stubbornly strong. One instructor suggested Mia continue training normally, while another quietly called her situation academically hopeless within earshot of both girl and beast. Mia heard that second comment, lowered her head, and another painful wave crossed the contract before she could pretend the words meant nothing. Ryan wanted to bite the man's shoe, but revenge seemed inefficient and probably fatal at his current stats. Instead, he concentrated on the energy building whenever Mia struggled emotionally, comparing it against everything he had felt before. The pattern was becoming obvious. Emotionally meaningful memories from his tamer accumulated inside him like unconventional EXP. Ryan disliked the mechanic morally, but understanding it meant he could search for positive ways to trigger growth without farming Mia's pain. He noticed again that joy and trust worked too, which meant he could progress without turning Mia's life into suffering content. The council eventually dismissed them without a replacement, leaving Mia officially stuck with the weakest recognized companion in school. For Mia, the decision felt like a sentence. For Ryan, it meant nobody could interrupt his experiments by re-rolling the account. Training classes began immediately, and the stat gap between Mia's team and everyone else became impossible to hide. Other students practiced elemental attacks, aerial movement, armored charges, and defensive formations with beasts naturally built for combat. Ryan could run, squeak, hide, and leave sticky footprints, none of which impressed the instructors, and rumors spread faster than any official report. Physical testing revealed another problem. His raw stats were genuinely terrible rather than merely underestimated by the ranking crystal. He could not overpower creatures his own size, barely damage practice targets, and got tired after embarrassingly short bursts. Ryan accepted the results without self-pity, because bad stats were useful once their exact limits were measured. If conventional combat was a dead build, then evolution and absorption had to carry the entire progression route. He began scavenging harmless mana whenever instructors looked away, nibbling cracked crystals and residue from magical exercises. Most samples produced almost nothing, but each successful absorption sharpened his sense for energy and confirmed the mechanic was repeatable. Ryan still showed no visible transformation, suggesting the hidden path required more than mindless mana grinding. Meanwhile, Mia struggled socially because students had begun treating her summon as proof she did not belong at Crownspire. Some classmates excluded her from partnered exercises, claiming an F- creature would only drag down their teams. Ryan hated watching Mia pretend those comments did not matter while the contract carried every suppressed emotion directly into him. One evening, she returned to the dorm area and finally cried without witnesses, holding Ryan close enough to soak his fur. Mia tried to hide how badly the academy's verdict hurt, but the contract carried the emotion straight into Ryan before she could bury it. Ryan realized the bond was not reading surface mood alone. It was preserving moments that mattered deeply enough to leave an imprint. That made the mechanic more dangerous than ordinary EXP, because meaningful memories could not be farmed without changing the person connected to him. He quietly set himself one rule: no deliberately hurting Mia, no manufactured trauma, and no treating a real teenager like an upgrade resource. If positive emotions counted too, then Ryan would rather level through trust, relief, and victories they earned together instead of exploiting her worst days. Mia eventually wiped her eyes and apologized for being weak, which irritated Ryan because every failure so far belonged to the system, not her. He pressed one tiny paw against her hand, and the contract answered with a warmer pulse than any training crystal had produced. The response was small, but it confirmed something important. The hidden root cared about shared meaning, not just raw magical output. Ryan stopped thinking of the bond as a battery and started treating it like a progression condition he was morally responsible for protecting. That shift mattered, because the very next emotional threshold would change his body before either of them understood what was happening. Ryan stayed still because comforting people had never been one of his strongest skills, even before losing human speech. Yet, as Mia cried, images and sensations began crossing their bond more clearly than before. Ryan sensed the summoning ceremony, classmates laughing, teachers looking disappointed, and Mia wondering whether she had ruined her own future. These were not complete thoughts, but the emotional impressions carried enough detail to explain what the contract was storing. The energy inside Ryan suddenly reached a threshold, and the hidden notification returned with enough intensity to make every earlier pulse feel insignificant. A condition had been fulfilled through accumulated emotional memories shared between contracted partners. Ryan barely had time to process the wording before his tiny body tightened as if something beneath the skin had awakened. Mia felt him tremble and immediately stopped crying, placing him on the bed, while fear replaced sadness and the contract surged between them. The slime coating Ryan's body began retreating inward instead of dripping uselessly across everything he touched, the first visible sign that evolution had started. His gray fur darkened until it swallowed nearby light, while a thin haze gathered beneath him like a second body made of shadow. Bones shifted without growing much larger, muscles tightened, and his clumsy limbs gained a balance he had never possessed. Ryan experienced the transformation as both pain and information, each change communicating what his new form could potentially do. When it ended, Mia stared at a creature still clearly shaped like a rat, but no longer helpless. Darkness clung around Ryan's outline, pulling beneath his paws and responding whenever he concentrated. The system identified the form as Shadow Rat, an evolution from F- to F+, which immediately offended Ryan's sense of reward design. After all that mystery and emotional buildup, he had evolved several tiny steps inside the same bottom tier. Mia did not care about efficient progression curves because she was too stunned that a slime rat had evolved at all. Academy records claimed the species had almost no meaningful evolution potential, yet Ryan transformed within days of summoning. When instructors examined him, surprise quickly collapsed into disappointment after the crystal displayed F+, and the watching students immediately noticed the difference. One teacher sighed and explained that the creature was still F rank, as though impossible evolution were an administrative inconvenience. The new form did not make Ryan physically intimidating, but the shadow under his paws responded to thought with almost zero delay. He tested it first in darkness, stretching the black haze under furniture until he could feel the surfaces it touched without moving himself. Bright light shortened the range, deep shade strengthened it, and thin strands of darkness could slide through gaps his body could never reach. Ryan immediately recognized the build: terrible raw damage, absurd utility, and exactly the kind of skill casual players would underrate until somebody broke it. He practiced while Mia slept, measuring distance in floor tiles, and stopping whenever the shadow began to lose shape or pull against his body. By morning, he could extend the darkness across a room without making it twitch visibly, giving him his first reliable scouting tool. Mia noticed he moved differently after the evolution, no longer stumbling like a wet tutorial mob whenever he jumped from desk to chair. She still heard the academy call him F rank, but the label felt less convincing every time Ryan demonstrated something the textbooks said should be impossible. Ryan liked that gap between reputation and function, because being underestimated gave them room to learn before stronger people decided they were valuable. The safest exploit was the one nobody respected yet, and Shadow Rat still looked harmless enough to keep most eyes pointed elsewhere. Ryan almost admired the commitment required to witness a bugged evolution and still obsess over the letter beside it. His attention moved elsewhere because the shadows surrounding his body reacted to thought with extraordinary precision. Ryan could flatten into darkness, extend the haze beneath nearby objects, and feel surfaces touched by his shadow. The skill offered little direct damage, but Ryan immediately recognized insane scouting and utility value in the darkness, responding to his thoughts. Game designers knew support skills were constantly underestimated until players discovered an irresponsible application that turned harmless utility into a broken strategy. Ryan spent several nights testing range and control while Mia slept, learning how far the shadow could stretch before collapsing. He discovered darkness improved reach, bright light weakened it, and thin extensions could move silently across walls and furniture. The more he practiced, the more cursed ideas appeared, most having absolutely nothing to do with heroic combat. The first practical breakthrough happened during an academy exam when Mia froze before questions she had struggled to study. Ryan rested beneath her desk, noticed the answer key near the instructor's table, and faced an important ethical dilemma. His conscience said cheating was wrong, while his developer brain observed that the skill clearly supported remote information retrieval. Ryan chose questionable mentorship and quietly extended his shadow across the classroom floor. The darkness slipped beneath desks, merged with existing shadows, and reached the instructor's table without attracting a glance. Through contact with the page, Ryan could not literally read text, but he sensed markings well enough to identify answer patterns. He relayed those patterns by tapping Mia's shoe in a sequence they had accidentally developed during earlier training. Mia initially thought he was restless, then recognized the rhythm, and realized her suspiciously smart rat was trying to communicate. What followed was less glorious than slaying dragons, but far more satisfying to Ryan's exhausted former office worker instincts. The world's weakest pet used shadow magic to help his tamer survive a school test, which was not heroic, but extremely on brand for Ryan. Mia improved enough to avoid embarrassment without suddenly becoming suspiciously perfect, which Ryan considered excellent balancing for their first illegal use of shadow utility. After class, she lifted him excitedly and whispered praise, while Ryan privately accepted that he had become a criminal tutor. Their shared amusement strengthened the contract again, proving positive experiences could fuel the same progression resource as painful ones. Ryan preferred that discovery because future evolution would not require turning Mia's adolescence into an emotional farming exploit. He began actively helping her train, using shadow control to demonstrate movement patterns and compensate for his awful physical stats. Mia gradually stopped hiding him from classmates and began treating his strange abilities like something worth understanding rather than apologizing for. Their relationship shifted from embarrassed tamer and defective pet toward two partners quietly testing mechanics nobody else recognized. After the test day stunt, Ryan and Mia began building a crude language of taps, pauses, and repeated gestures without admitting how intelligent he really was. 1 tap meant stop, 2 meant move, 3 meant look again, and Mia slowly learned which tiny movements were deliberate rather than random pet behavior. The communication was messy, but it gave them something stronger students already took for granted: coordination based on trust instead of shouted commands. Ryan used shadow strands to point out blind angles during drills, while Mia adjusted her positioning to compensate for his awful physical stats. Instead of trying to make an F-rank pet fight like a dragon, they started designing encounters around information, timing, and whatever the opponent assumed. That was the first time Ryan felt less like Mia's defective summon and more like the tactical partner he had promised himself he would become. The academy still saw a gimmick, but Mia stopped apologizing whenever instructors paired them against stronger teams during controlled practice. She began asking what Ryan wanted through simple choices, and he answered by moving toward one option or tapping the other with his paw. Every successful exchange made the contract feel steadier, turning communication itself into a progress signal, even when Ryan's rank refused to move. Then practical combat exposed a second mechanic, one so broken that even Ryan had not predicted it from Shadow Rat's description. Then practical combat training introduced the discovery that changed everything about Ryan's hidden build: and made the shadow rat form far more dangerous. Students were instructed to exchange controlled magical attacks, so companions could practice defensive reactions without serious injury or risk to their contracts. Ryan's opponent released a weak elemental projectile, barely strong enough to qualify as a training spell, and the fight stopped following normal rank logic. Mia shouted for him to dodge, but Ryan deliberately stayed still because the incoming mana produced the same taste as the stone. The spell struck his shadow directly, and instead of burning through it, the energy vanished into his body. For one heartbeat, the training field went silent because everyone expected the F-rank rat to get blasted backward. Ryan remained standing, equally surprised, as unfamiliar mana circulated inside him without causing damage. The instructor ordered another test, increasing the spell slightly, while Mia protested that Ryan had already been hit once. Ryan ignored the reasonable concern, positioned himself again, and absorbed the second attack just as completely, and the rank advantage suddenly meant much less. This time, he felt the process clearly. Foreign magic entered, lost its structure, and became something his body could store. Shadow Rat had not just gained darkness control. The evolution had stabilized the absorption anomaly triggered by that first stone. Ryan's mind immediately returned to the Void Devourer mechanics he had designed before dying, forcing the opponent to abandon the obvious strategy. That boss survived by consuming structured magical effects, breaking them down, and repurposing energy outside normal combat rules, exactly like Ryan was beginning to do. The similarity was now too precise to dismiss, though Ryan still had no clue why Asterra mirrored his old design logic. The instructor stared at him with professional curiosity instead of ridicule for the first time since the summoning ceremony. Mia noticed the change too, standing straighter as adults finally examined her companion instead of looking through him. Another controlled spell disappeared, then another, until the instructor stopped testing and started taking notes at ridiculous speed. Nobody could identify the ability because registered shadow rats were not supposed to absorb hostile magic under any known evolution record. Ryan privately found that hilarious because he had not known the skill existed either until the system handed him another unlisted mechanic. He had only been checking for a bug, and the bug answered by swallowing the attack, which completely changed the flow of the fight. News of the abnormal F-rank creature spread through Crownspire by evening, replacing some mockery with confused caution. Students who had laughed now watched Ryan from farther away, uncertain whether touching him might make their own spells disappear. Ryan enjoyed the change more than he wanted to admit, though he still looked like something a cafeteria would chase with a broom. The academy tested his classification again, but the crystal stubbornly remained F+, despite an ability nobody could explain. That mismatch became Ryan's most useful clue, because official rank clearly measured something his hidden root was beginning to ignore. Power, species, and classification were no longer advancing together, meaning Asterra's recognized evolution ladder did not describe his entire state. Mia asked whether he understood what everyone was saying, and Ryan deliberately gave her the most innocent rat expression he could manage. Revealing intelligence still seemed dangerous while adults were discussing examinations, abnormalities, and potential magical research, which made the Academy's assumptions look increasingly fragile. Yet Mia had begun noticing how consistently he reacted to language, especially whenever people discussed decisions affecting them. Ryan knew secrecy would become harder as his abilities expanded, but survival still mattered more than satisfying anyone's curiosity. Ryan spent the next several sessions testing absorption with the caution of someone who knew overpowered mechanics usually had equally overpowered drawbacks. Weak elemental spells vanished almost cleanly, but stronger attacks left his body heavy, hot, and briefly difficult to control after the impact. He could not absorb physical momentum, so a magically reinforced claw still threatened him if the spell coating disappeared, but the actual limb kept moving. That distinction prevented the skill from becoming an instant win button and forced Mia to keep treating positioning as seriously as absorption itself. Ryan also discovered he could not safely hold unlimited foreign mana. Too much stored energy made the shadow around him twitch and leak unpredictably. Instead of chasing bigger attacks, he trained clean intake, quick release, and the discipline to dodge anything his body had no reason to tank. Mia learned to read the warning signs, especially the moment Ryan's shadow thickened and his movements became slightly slower after absorbing too much. Their drill stopped looking like owner and pet following a textbook and started looking like two players building a strategy around an unpatched mechanic. Ryan still had no clue what his next form required, but his control was improving enough that evolution no longer felt like the only path forward. That patience lasted until a dying B-rank beast entered the training grounds, and Ryan's body reacted before his brain could pretend not to notice. Over the following weeks, Mia and Ryan practiced absorption carefully, discovering that weaker spells disappeared almost instantly on contact. Stronger magic required concentration, and absorbing too much energy at once left Ryan's tiny body heavy and unstable. Those limits reassured him because truly unrestricted cheat skills usually hid costs players discovered after ruining an entire build. He treated every failure as data, mapping which magical effects could be consumed and which simply slid around his shadow. Mia became increasingly good at recognizing when Ryan wanted her to test something, even without understanding his internal logic. Their silent coordination improved enough that instructors began praising Mia's control instead of merely discussing her pet's anomaly. For the first time since summoning day, Mia received positive attention without a sympathetic qualifier attached afterward. Ryan sensed her pride through the contract and realized progression was changing more than his own skill set. The system had told Mia her worth depended on what she summoned, while their partnership was slowly proving performance mattered more. That realization strengthened Ryan's commitment to finding the hidden root before somebody decided anomaly meant confiscation. He began searching academy spaces for unusual magical residue, always staying close enough that Mia would not panic. Damaged training stones provided energy, but no breakthrough, while ordinary elemental crystals tasted different without triggering the evolution condition Ryan was hunting. Ryan concluded his next transformation probably required a specific category of input rather than simple mana accumulation. That matched his old design philosophy. Hidden evolutions felt memorable when players needed weird conditions instead of predictable grinding. The realization was comforting and disturbing, because Ryan's old creative instincts seemed to be mirrored by the world's actual rules. He remembered designing routes that demanded emotional bonds, rare materials, environmental triggers, and sometimes consumption of stronger monsters. Ryan immediately hoped that last category would never matter, because reincarnation had not improved his appetite for raw monster meat. Unfortunately, the hidden system appeared entirely indifferent to his culinary preferences. During one supervised combat session, an injured B-rank beast was brought near the field after another exercise went wrong. Ryan smelled its blood before seeing it, but what really caught him was the insane magical density inside the wounded creature. His absorption instinct reacted so violently that Ryan stopped moving, suddenly aware of a hunger unlike anything he had experienced since reincarnation. This was not normal appetite. His body recognized the higher-tier beast as evolution material. Ryan hated the realization because hidden mechanics were much more fun when they involved crystals instead of dying living creatures. The B-rank beast was already beyond saving, surrounded by handlers who could not stabilize its collapsing mana core. Ryan stayed beside Mia and resisted the pull while the dying creature's energy leaked into the air, forcing him to confront what the hidden root demanded. He could feel the system presenting an opportunity without displaying instructions, as though his body already knew the condition. Mia noticed his unusual stillness and followed his gaze toward the dying beast, though she could not understand what he sensed. Ryan faced the ugliest decision of his new life: ignore the trigger or consume what remained after the beast died. He reminded himself that refusing the material would not save it, but that did not make the choice feel clean. Turning another creature's death into progression made the hidden evolution route feel much darker than his earlier experiments. Ryan stayed where he was after the beast died, forcing himself to separate hunger from choice before moving anywhere near the discarded remains. The hidden route offered no friendly prompt explaining morality, only a physical certainty that the B-rank tissue could satisfy, something his evolution still lacked. He hated how familiar that design felt. He had once built secret upgrade conditions specifically to make players question whether the reward justified the action. Now, there was no player avatar between him and the choice, and no reset button if the decision changed what kind of creature he became. Mia was talking with an instructor nearby, unaware that Ryan was staring at the first evolution condition that genuinely frightened him. He reminded himself again that the beast was already dead, and that the discarded tissue would otherwise be destroyed after useful components were removed. That did not make the act noble, but it separated scavenging from killing, which was enough for Ryan to move without lying to himself. His first bite tasted less like meat than concentrated mana, collapsing into a pattern his body seemed born to recognize. The second bite triggered a pull so strong that Ryan realized Shadow Rat had only been an intermediate build, leading toward something much stranger. By the time Mia turned back toward him, the darkness under Ryan was already folding inward, and the hidden root had committed to its next form. When the beast finally died, handlers removed valuable components, while discarded magical tissue remained near the field. Ryan waited until Mia was distracted, then approached the remnant with the reluctance of a man remembering terrible office lunches. The smell was more magical than rotten, and his new body reacted before his human preferences regained control. He bit into the B-rank flesh, and the effect was immediate enough to erase every remaining doubt about what his next evolution required. Energy exploded through him, denser than every crystal and absorbed training spell combined, while the shadow under his body began collapsing inward. Ryan forced himself to continue because stopping halfway felt more dangerous than completing whatever evolution condition had awakened. Each bite dissolved unnaturally, stripped of ordinary matter, as Ryan's body consumed the magical structure hidden inside the remains instead of digesting flesh normally. The moment enough had been absorbed, the shadow around Ryan collapsed inward like darkness pulled through a tiny hole. He understood his next evolution had started, and this change felt fundamentally different from becoming a shadow rat. The hidden root was no longer teaching him to control darkness, it was teaching him to erase what entered it. Mia found Ryan just as his body began distorting, and her alarm pulled instructors back toward the field. The darkness around him vanished completely, not because it weakened, but because it condensed into something no longer behaving like shadow. His eyes turned completely black, reflecting neither light nor color, while the air around his small body felt unnaturally empty. Ryan's fur became darker and smoother, yet the most disturbing change was the absence spreading around him. Mana, near his body, bent inward almost imperceptibly, as though nearby energy recognized a destination it could not resist. The transformation ended without dramatic size or armor, leaving observers staring at another rat that somehow felt less present. The system identified the new form as Void Rat and raised his official classification only to E rank. Several Academy officials looked disappointed, which Ryan considered an impressive failure to understand how completely the new form had changed his actual combat rules. Mia ignored the rank and rushed toward him, checking whether the evolution had hurt the companion she still called Slimy. Ryan allowed the nickname despite having evolved beyond slime, because correcting branding problems required revealing speech. His first test happened accidentally when a nearby training spell drifted close enough for the void around him to react. The spell did not strike Ryan, touch his body, or even visibly slow before simply disappearing. Shadow Rat had needed contact, but Void Rat seemed able to rip magical structure apart before it reached him. Ryan immediately understood why the system demanded B-rank material despite promoting him only into EE. The visible rank jump was tiny because the real reward was not raw stats. It was access to a new rule. Ryan tested the edge of the new void field by approaching a weak practice sigil, and the magic began fraying before his whiskers reached it. That was the key difference from Shadow Rat. He no longer needed an attack to hit first before his body could dismantle it. The void behaved like a tiny dead zone around him, stripping structure from nearby mana whenever Ryan consciously allowed the effect to open. He kept the radius narrow because widening it made ambient spells flicker, an easy way to announce that the E-rank label was lying. Mia watched him erase one harmless projectile after another, and finally understood why Ryan looked more cautious after this evolution, not more excited. Power had jumped, but control had become harder, and one careless reaction could ruin another student's spell or trigger a full academy investigation. Ryan therefore trained the opposite of what most battle pets practiced. Instead of maximizing output, he learned how to keep the void closed. That restraint gave Mia confidence, because she could now signal when to open the field, instead of hoping Slimy's instincts made the right choice. During drills, Ryan let harmless physical objects pass normally while selectively breaking only the magical coating wrapped around them. The exercise taught him that the void targeted structure, not matter, which would later become the difference between blocking a spell and surviving a claw. Ryan also discovered that absorbed elemental energy did not vanish completely. Faint traces remained inside him like temporary resources waiting for release. He could not reproduce a full enemy spell, but he could push fragments back out in crude, inefficient bursts that made his developer instincts light up. Mia called the first tiny flame he coughed out pathetic, and Ryan privately agreed while adding elemental conversion to his growing list of broken possibilities. The joke helped both of them relax, but the old tournament judge kept watching from across the field with none of the other instructors' amusement. His expression told Ryan the man understood one thing clearly. E-rank was no longer a useful description of what Slimy could actually do. Ryan could now consume magic as an environmental interaction instead of merely surviving attacks that hit him. The Academy's elderly tournament judge happened to witness the final test and watched Ryan longer than everyone else. Unlike younger instructors, the old man did not reach for a crystal or dismiss the form because of its letter. He watched the space around Ryan, then the fading remnants of mana, and his expression became carefully unreadable. Ryan noticed the reaction and marked the judge as the first person who might understand why E-rank did not tell the whole story. Unfortunately, Crownspire's annual Beast Duel tournament was approaching, and Mia's name had already been entered. The competition was supposed to show student progress, but some classmates expected Mia's participation for a much nastier reason. They wanted the girl who summoned an F-rat to stand publicly beside stronger beasts and confirm the old hierarchy. Withdrawal would protect Mia from embarrassment, yet it would also reinforce the idea that she and Ryan had no place competing. Ryan left the decision to Mia by refusing to react when teachers explained she could still withdraw voluntarily. The Academy tournament registration opened before Ryan had fully mapped the Void Rat form, turning their new ability into a deadline instead of a laboratory problem. Mia had been entered months earlier, back when some students expected her appearance to become a public reminder of what an F-summon looked like. Teachers offered withdrawal after the strange evolutions, but pulling out now would let every rumor define Mia before she ever tested herself in public. Ryan refused to choose for her. He simply sat on the registration paper and waited until Mia decided what kind of risk she wanted. She eventually signed, hands shaking slightly, then looked at Slimy with the expression of someone terrified but tired of letting other people write her ending. The contract answered with a steady pulse rather than panic, and Ryan took that as his clearest signal that they were making the decision together. Tournament preparation became a matchup problem. Ryan could erase magic, but a heavier beast could still flatten him before the void mattered. Mia drilled lateral movement, feints, and retreat angles instead of flashy attacks, building a plan around surviving the physical part of each exchange. Ryan practiced opening the void for fractions of a second, enough to delete one spell without letting nearby arena wards notice how broad the effect could become. They also agreed that he would not reveal stored element release unless the match forced it, keeping at least one card hidden from curious officials. That strategy frustrated classmates who kept asking for demonstrations, because Slimy spent most public practice sessions looking deliberately unimpressive. Ryan even missed easy jumps on purpose, reminding everyone that the terrifying anomaly was still physically shaped like a rat with questionable athleticism. Mia played along, treating every laugh like camouflage rather than humiliation, which showed how far she had moved from the girl who cried after summoning him. Their goal was no longer proving Slimy was secretly legendary. It was winning enough space to keep learning without becoming somebody else's research project. Ryan knew the plan would collapse the moment a strong opponent forced him to show more, and the tournament was almost guaranteed to do exactly that. When the brackets appeared, Mia's first opponent was not the Ember Drake Ryan had studied, but a D-rank Ironback Hound built almost entirely around physical pressure. The Hound carried almost no projected magic for Ryan to absorb, only dense muscle, reinforced claws, and enough speed to make his tiny body look painfully fragile. Ryan stared at the matchup and realized the tournament had found the exact counter he feared, a beast that could win without feeding the void anything useful. Mia saw the same problem immediately, and instead of panicking, she changed their plan from absorption practice to pure movement, spacing, and shadow misdirection. The opening signal sounded, and the Ironback Hound crossed half the arena before Ryan could finish measuring its first step. Mia snapped a retreat command. Ryan dove sideways, and the Hound's paw cracked the stone where his body had been a heartbeat earlier. The crowd laughed at first because Slimy looked exactly like an E-rank rat running for his life against a proper combat beast. Ryan did not disagree. For once, the tier list was describing the immediate problem with irritating accuracy. He opened the void on instinct when the Hound lunged again, but nothing happened because teeth, bone, and momentum were not spells he could simply delete. That failed reaction cost him, and one glancing shoulder check sent Ryan rolling hard enough to make Mia feel the impact through their contract. Mia almost called the match, then noticed the Hound kept following Ryan's body while ignoring the shadow he stretched beneath its feet. She changed tactics on the spot, ordering Ryan to stop trying to outrun the Hound and start making its own speed work against it. Ryan flattened his shadow across the arena wall, then snapped it sideways just as the hound committed to another full-speed charge. The beast reacted to the moving darkness like a second target, turned too sharply, and lost enough footing for Ryan to slip past its claws. Mia repeated the pattern from different angles, not hurting the hound, but forcing it to waste momentum every time it tried to finish the smaller beast. Ryan realized this was not a damage race anymore. It was a pathing exploit, and Mia had found the bug before he did. The ironback hound grew frustrated, accelerated again, and drove Ryan toward the boundary, where one clean hit would end the match. Mia waited until the last possible second, then ordered Ryan straight toward the hound, instead of away from it. Ryan trusted her, sprinted under the incoming chest, and stretched his shadow behind him like a false retreat line. The hound followed the wrong angle, slammed shoulder first into the reinforced boundary, and stunned itself without Ryan landing a meaningful attack. The judge stopped the match when the beast could no longer continue safely, awarding Mia the win through control rather than raw damage. Ryan hated how close it had been, but the lesson was priceless. Void Rat was broken against magic, and still very mortal against the wrong body type. Mia had also proven something the crowd had missed since summoning day. She was not standing behind Slimy's power. She was actively learning how to use it. That victory changed their tournament plan completely, because every future opponent would now know the tiny rat could be pressured physically. Then the next bracket appeared, and Ryan saw the D-rank Ember Drake waiting for them with exactly the kind of magic his Void wanted to eat. By the time Mia entered the next round, the arena had stopped laughing and started watching closely, because the Ironback match proved Slimy could bleed and still adapt. Across from them, the Ember Drake scraped one claw across stone, heavier than Ryan, but far more dependent on elemental attacks than the hound had been. Its tamer had clearly watched the previous fight and opened with physical pressure, refusing to hand Ryan free fire before testing whether claws could finish the job. Mia expected that adjustment and kept Ryan near the center, where he had room to retreat without getting pinned against another boundary. The Drake lunged, Ryan slipped beneath. One swipe, and the claw tore a groove through stone deep enough to erase any illusion that this matchup was safe. A second charge came faster, forcing Ryan to abandon a shadow feint when the Drake simply powered through the visual trick instead of chasing it. Mia called 2 sharp steps left, then a sudden cut inward, using the same movement discipline that had barely saved them against the Ironback hound. Ryan cleared the Drake's shoulder by inches, but the larger beast clipped his tail and reminded him that one clean physical hit could still end everything. The opposing tamer smiled when Ryan stumbled, convinced the tournament had already exposed the weakness hidden beneath the strange rank abilities. Ryan agreed with the diagnosis. The only disagreement was whether the Drake could exploit that weakness without eventually using the fire it was bred to trust. Mia deliberately widened the distance, giving the Drake a cleaner firing lane, while making the retreat look like fear instead of bait. The opposing tamer took it, ordering a flame burst the instant Ryan appeared too far away to threaten physically. Heat gathered between the Drake's teeth, and Ryan felt the elemental structure forming before the first spark reached open air. Mia gave the dodge command they had practiced, but left the final choice to Ryan because only he could feel whether the Void was stable enough. Ryan planted all 4 paws instead, opened the field, and let the first wave of fire roll directly over his tiny body. For one heartbeat, the arena saw nothing but flame, and Mia's fear spiked hard enough to make Ryan nearly close the Void too early. Then the blaze narrowed, twisted inward, and vanished through a space around Ryan that looked far too small to contain a dragon's breath. The fire was not blocked or reflected. Its magical structure simply stopped holding together once the Void began peeling it apart. Mia felt Ryan still standing through the contract before the smoke cleared, and that certainty kept her from breaking formation. The crowd went silent because the same rat that barely survived a physical hound had just erased a D-rank elemental attack without moving. The opposing tamer recovered quickly and ordered another rush, trying to return to the physical advantage before Ryan could exploit whatever he had absorbed. Ryan retreated this time, because surviving fire did not make him stupid enough to tank claws simply for dramatic effect. The Drake chased, but Mia used a shadow cue to pull Ryan across its blind side and force another hard turn. That movement created distance again, and the frustrated tamer made the exact decision Ryan had been waiting for: use more fire to stop the escape. The second breath came larger and hotter, bright enough to trigger the arena's emergency wards before it even reached Ryan. Mia did not tell him to dodge this time. She held position and trusted the signal they had built through weeks of controlled testing. Ryan widened the void and caught the blast, feeling heat disappear first, then color, then the pattern, keeping the entire attack coherent. The spell collapsed into him, but the amount of stored elemental energy made his limbs noticeably heavier and exposed another limit the crowd could not see. Ryan realized he had enough capacity for one clean payoff, not an endless loop of absorbing whatever the Drake threw next. The opposing tamer misread Ryan's stillness as fear and ordered a third attack before the void could recover. Mia saw Slimy's shadow twitch, recognized the overload warning from training, and shouted for movement instead of letting him greet another spell. Ryan obeyed immediately, diving aside as the third flame scorched the arena floor where he had been standing. That decision surprised the crowd more than another absorption would have, because it proved the broken skill still had a ceiling. The Drake rushed through its own fading fire, finally combining physical pressure with magic, the way its tamer should have from the beginning. Ryan had no room to absorb safely, so Mia ordered the same inside cut that worked against the Ironback Hound, and trusted his timing. He slipped beneath the Drake's chest, opened the void for only a fraction of a second, and stripped the magical reinforcement from one foreleg. The leg did not vanish, but its boosted stability did, causing the Drake to stumble under its own weight during the turn. Ryan finally understood the stronger application of Void Rat. He did not need to eat the whole spell if removing one support layer could change the fight. Mia saw the opening and ordered him forward before the Drake recovered, turning their defense into the first real offensive sequence of the match. Ryan closed the distance, then released the smallest portion of stored fire he could manage without destabilizing the void again. What came out was objectively pathetic, one weak orange spark popping toward the Drake's face with less force than its warm-up breath. The spark barely hurt, but the psychological damage was brutal. After the Drake had watched a rat eat 2 full fire attacks, it recoiled, lost footing on the weakened foreleg, and crashed sideways before its tamer could reset the formation. The opposing tamer shouted another command, but the Drake stared at Ryan instead of advancing, suddenly unsure whether its signature weapon belonged to it anymore. Ryan considered that reaction hilarious, but Mia stayed focused and refused to celebrate until the judge checked the beast's condition. The judge gave the Drake one chance to continue, and it backed away rather than cross the distance toward Slimy again. The match ended there, not because Ryan overpowered a D-rank beast, but because Mia and Ryan forced it through every matchup layer until its confidence collapsed. The arena erupted, yet Ryan's first thought was not victory. It was relief that the Ironback Hound had taught them the lesson needed to survive this round. Without that earlier near loss, Ryan probably would have stood still, absorbed too much, and discovered his storage ceiling with claws already on top of him. Mia lifted him with shaking hands, understanding exactly how close both matches had come, despite the crowd treating the fire-eating finish like an easy stop. Their contract pulsed with something steadier than panic or triumph, the confidence of two partners who had now covered weaknesses for each other under real pressure. The elderly judge approached afterward and ignored the cheering, studying the empty space around Ryan with far more concern than excitement. He told Mia the strange part was not that Slimy absorbed fire, but that the spell's structure disappeared before the energy ever reached his body. Ryan stopped joking internally, because that interpretation matched the Void Devourer design far more closely than ordinary elemental resistance ever could. The judge warned Mia to be careful about who saw the ability again, because institutions were much less forgiving of exceptions they could not classify. Mia looked toward the officials already writing reports, and understood the tournament had solved one problem while creating a much larger one. Ryan reached the same conclusion. Winning had protected Mia's place at Crownspire, but it had also put their hidden evolution route on the world's radar. By evening, stories about the E-rank rat that survived a physical counter and then ate dragonfire had already escaped the academy grounds. Some students called Slimy secretly overpowered. Others claimed the bracket was rigged, and Ryan preferred both explanations to the truth. The academy repeated his classification test anyway, and every crystal stubbornly returned E-rank, despite evidence that the label no longer described his actual mechanics. That mismatch became Ryan's most useful clue, because rank, species, and combat rules were clearly no longer advancing together on the same track. Mia stopped apologizing for Slimy after that day, but she also stopped treating every new ability like something they should show people for validation. Their goal shifted from proving everyone wrong to learning fast enough that the next institution asking questions could not separate them by force. Unfortunately, the tournament report had already reached the one institution in Asterra built specifically to investigate impossible pet contract behavior. The tournament footage became more dangerous than the victory itself, because every replay showed an E-rank rat erasing effects that should have overwhelmed him. Crownspire officials attached the full combat log to Ryan's file, turning what looked like a school upset into a formal anomaly report. Mia noticed instructor stop asking how strong Slimy was and start asking what rules his evolution route appeared to ignore. Ryan preferred the old mockery. Curiosity from people with laboratories, budgets, and legal authority was a much worse aggro table. He and Mia quietly agreed to stop demonstrating absorption unless a real threat forced them, even if classmates kept begging for another fire-eating trick. The decision came too late, because tournament censors had already recorded the void distortion frame by frame and forwarded everything with the match results. By the next morning, the strange E-rank victory was no longer just academy gossip. It had become data waiting for someone powerful to notice. The Celestial Contract Registry noticed immediately, because its databases flagged evolution results that contradicted species records, rank progression, or known contract behavior. Ryan's file violated all three categories at once: impossible slime rat evolution, unexplained spell deletion, and an E-rank label that no longer matched performance. Registry analysts requested Crownspire's raw sensor data instead of the school's summary, which told the elderly judge exactly how serious the attention had become. He warned Mia that curiosity was turning institutional, and institutions rarely treated an unclassifiable beast like a harmless school mystery for long. Mia asked whether hiding Slimy would help, but the judge said disappearing now would only make the anomaly look more dangerous. Ryan hated that logic because it was correct. Once a system started logging an exception, silence often looked more suspicious than controlled cooperation. So Mia chose the least bad option: stay at Crownspire, reveal as little as possible, and never let registry staff separate her from Ryan. Ryan approved with a small paw tap, already shifting from tournament strategy to the much uglier game of surviving official scrutiny. That new objective replaced celebration almost instantly, because their next opponent would not enter an arena or obey tournament rules. Within days, Crownspire received a formal registry request for Mia's contract records, Ryan's evolution history, and every sensor reading from the tournament. Unfortunately, winning a tournament match by eating dragon fire had already made secrecy much harder, while Mia's reputation shifted almost in real time. Students surrounded Mia afterward, some suddenly friendly, others suspicious, and several demanding demonstrations Ryan refused to provide under any circumstances. Mia protected him by claiming the ability only activated unpredictably, which was false, but strategically excellent, while the academy still lacked real answers. Ryan silently upgraded his opinion of her because she was learning deception faster than any academy curriculum could teach. The academy repeated classification tests after the tournament, and every result stubbornly continued displaying E-rank despite what the arena had just witnessed. That contradiction spread beyond campus because reports described an E-rank rat neutralizing D-rank fire with impossible efficiency in front of hundreds of witnesses. Ryan realized the world did not need to understand him for the world to notice him, and attention was becoming its own threat. He reduced unnecessary demonstrations, returned to acting harmless, and spent more time sleeping visibly on Mia's shoulder whenever unfamiliar adults entered the room. The performance fooled classmates less than before, because nobody forgot seeing the same sleepy rat consume dragon fire. He asked Mia to keep Slimy close, then crouched low enough to watch the faint distortion around Ryan without relying on a rank crystal. The judge explained that ordinary absorption converted mana, but Ryan's field appeared to dismantle the structure, telling that mana what spell it was. That distinction sounded academic to Mia, yet Ryan understood immediately why the man's voice had dropped almost to a whisper. If the judge was right, Void Rat was not countering fire. It was consuming the rule package that allowed magical fire to function. Ryan had built the Void Devourer around the same concept, except the boss version eventually targeted contracts, restrictions, and system permissions too. The similarity hit harder than the victory, because every evolution now looked less like coincidence and more like a path toward his old final boss. The judge warned Mia not to demonstrate the ability casually, especially around organizations whose authority depended on predictable contract mechanics. He never named the Celestial Contract Registry, but the pause before mentioning organizations told Ryan exactly what kind of institution he meant. Mia thanked him without fully understanding the political danger, while Ryan silently upgraded the judge from suspicious observer to useful warning system. By the time they left the arena, classmates who once called Slimy tutorial fodder were suddenly asking whether Mia wanted to train together. She accepted none of the fake friendliness immediately, choosing instead to carry Ryan back to the quiet hallway where they could breathe. Ryan felt pride through the bond, but it came mixed with anxiety because winning had solved the tournament problem by creating a much larger visibility problem. Mia asked whether he had known the fire trick would work, and Ryan gave the least convincing innocent squeak of his entire second life. She stared at him for several seconds, clearly adding understands too much to the list of mysteries she was no longer willing to ignore. Ryan pretended to groom himself, a defensive strategy with terrible long-term prospects, but excellent short-term comedic value whenever Mia asked dangerous questions. Mia's social position changed gradually, not into admiration exactly, but into uncertainty that felt almost as powerful as the ridicule it replaced. Students who mocked her stopped predicting her future so confidently, because the future had already violated expectations twice. Teachers began requesting detailed notes about Ryan's diet, training, evolution triggers, and mana intake after the tournament report started circulating outside Crownspire. Mia could not answer most of those questions because the real experiments happened inside Ryan's head, and usually without anyone's permission. Ryan monitored every conversation while pretending to groom himself, increasingly aware that casual curiosity was turning into institutional interest. The old judge's warning stayed with him because weird pets attracted researchers, and researchers eventually attracted people with authority. Despite the attention, Mia and Ryan kept training because secrecy was useless if they stayed weak enough to capture. Ryan studied the boundary of his void field, learning that active focus could widen the space where spells destabilized. Mia practiced movement patterns designed to keep physical attackers away, while allowing magic to approach from controlled angles. Their coordination became less like owner commanding pet, and more like two players covering each other's bad matchups through timing, trust, and positioning. Ryan began anticipating Mia's decisions from subtle shifts in the contract before she moved or spoke. Mia, meanwhile, learned to read Ryan's intentions from posture, tiny gestures, and changes in the void around him. That bond gave them an advantage no stat screen could display, which Ryan found more satisfying than a rank-up. He had designed countless systems where players chased rarity while ignoring synergy, and now his life depended on the lesson. Weeks passed without another evolution condition, but progress continued through control rather than flashy transformations or another convenient jump on the rank chart. Ryan became capable of swallowing moderate elemental attacks without visible effort and releasing tiny fragments when necessary, without losing control of the void. He deliberately kept those releases weak because offensive conversion would create even more questions from instructors already treating Slimy like a walking anomaly. Mia respected the caution, though she sometimes teased him about winning a tournament match with magical indigestion instead of anything remotely heroic. Ryan responded by nibbling her sleeve whenever the joke became excessive, maintaining what he considered professional boundaries between tamer and overqualified rat. Their quieter routine might have continued if the tournament report had stayed inside Crownspire, and nobody at school knew how to classify it. The tournament report spread beyond Crownspire before the Academy could decide how much of the anomaly should remain internal. Official notes still listed Slimy as E rank, yet attached witness statements described him deleting D rank fire without taking visible damage. That mismatch triggered automated review flags because registered species data said Void Rat should not exist at all, much less behave this way. By the next morning, unfamiliar seals appeared on correspondence moving through the headmaster's office, and senior instructors became noticeably less talkative around Mia. Ryan recognized institutional panic immediately. Developers used the same tone when a bug report reached people with permission to shut down the bill. The old judge's warning suddenly felt less theoretical, as Academy staff began requesting detailed logs of Slimy's food, training, and evolution history. Mia could answer the public parts, but every honest explanation ended at the same impossible point. Ryan kept discovering mechanics nobody had taught them. Ryan stopped using the void in public and returned to sleeping visibly on Mia's shoulder, hoping harmless presentation could slow whoever was coming. It did not, because the Celestial Contract Registry had already opened a formal anomaly case on the E-rank beast that ate structured magic. When registry investigators arrived at Crownspire, Ryan understood the tournament had not been the climax. It had simply put his hidden build on the world's radar. By the time the investigators arrived, Ryan understood the Celestial Contract Registry was not a school office, but the authority tracking pet contracts across Asterra. Every legitimate contract, evolution record, species classification, and high-rank beast eventually passed through that enormous bureaucracy before entering official history. A creature evolving through an unknown route would already interest them. A creature eating magical rules demanded an investigation. Ryan learned about the registry when Academy staff suddenly became nervous around visitors wearing silver celestial insignia. Mia was summoned to a private examination room, and Ryan accompanied her because their permanent contract made separation difficult. The investigators began politely, asking where Ryan came from, despite already knowing he appeared through Crownspire's official ritual. They asked what he had eaten when his first evolution happened, what Mia remembered feeling, and whether anyone altered the bond. Mia answered honestly where she could, and admitted ignorance whenever questions reached Ryan's private experiments or the mechanics he had never explained aloud. Ryan stayed motionless on the table, extremely grateful. Nobody expected a rat to understand interrogation tactics or notice when adults contradicted themselves. The investigators placed diagnostic arrays around him to read mana signatures, species traits, rank data, and evolutionary lineage. One device found traces of slime rat biology, another detected shadow affinity, and a third simply crashed before producing a usable lineage result. Each additional test produced more contradiction, and the investigators' professional curiosity slowly shifted into the kind of unease Ryan trusted, much less. Ryan resisted absorbing the diagnostic spells because doing so would confirm exactly what the registry feared about the E-rank anomaly sitting on their table. Holding the void instinct back required concentration as layered mana swept across his body repeatedly without being consumed or stripped of structure. Mia noticed his tension and rested one hand beside him, strengthening the bond enough to help him stay still. The room felt less like a medical exam and more like a boss phase, where every instrument was waiting for Ryan to make one wrong move. Each scan used a different magical layer, forcing him to suppress the void repeatedly instead of simply enduring one harmless measurement. Mia kept her hand beside him without petting or speaking, giving Ryan a fixed emotional signal whenever the diagnostic pressure became difficult to ignore. That tiny contact did more than calm him. It made the contract feel clearer than the registry's own equipment could explain. One examiner recalibrated the lineage array twice, because slime rat biology, shadow affinity, and void behavior should not coexist inside one progression history. Another checked the equipment for tampering, unwilling to accept that the contradiction might belong to Ryan rather than the machine. Ryan watched their confusion and realized the registry trusted databases the same way bad players trusted tier lists, absolutely, until reality punished them. The more the devices failed, the less the investigators treated him like an underperforming pet, and the more they treated him like corrupted data. That change in attitude worried Mia enough that her fingers tightened beside him, and Ryan deliberately kept his body relaxed so she would not panic. Then one monitoring node cracked under the strain, and a small fragment of condensed system mana skittered across the floor before the investigators could contain it. Ryan recognized the fragment instantly because it tasted nothing like ordinary magic. This was organized structure, closer to instructions than raw power. His body reacted with brutal hunger, but this time, Ryan did not let instinct make the decision for him. He looked at the investigators, the broken node, and Mia's tense hand beside him, fully aware that eating evidence during an official examination was insane. It was also the first piece of system-level material he had ever seen outside a sealed device, and there was no guarantee he would get another chance. Ryan gave himself 1 second to calculate the downside: exposure, containment, confiscation, and possibly proving every fear the registry already had about him. Then he calculated the upside: a direct sample of the architecture that classified every contracted beast in Asterra. His old developer brain reached the conclusion before caution could win. If this was a one-time exploit window, he was not letting it despawn. Ryan lunged deliberately, caught the fragment between his teeth, and swallowed it, while 3 investigators shouted at exactly the same time. The system node dissolved inside him, not into ordinary mana, but into relationships between permissions, ranks, species labels, and contract pathways. Mia stared, because there was no pretending this had been an accident. Slimy had seen the forbidden material and chosen to eat it anyway. Ryan met her eyes for half a second, silently admitting that, yes, this was probably the dumbest smart decision he had made since reincarnating. The structured information unfolded faster than he could process it, and every diagnostic array in the room suddenly felt less like magic and more like readable architecture. Then the hidden root reacted to his choice, pulling the void inward while luminous rune patterns began crawling across his fur. The investigators backed away as their own equipment flickered in response, realizing the anomaly was no longer merely absorbing the system from outside. Ryan was evolving into something capable of reading the rules he had just chosen to consume. Black void around Ryan contracted, while thin, luminous symbols appeared across his fur, like runes written by an invisible programmer. His body stayed small, yet every marking shifted whenever nearby magic changed, reacting like live debugging data written directly across his fur. The investigators backed away because no evolution record described anything remotely similar to the moving rune patterns. Now reading their own equipment, Mia stayed beside him despite their warnings, gripping the table while their contract pulsed violently and the new runes spread across Ryan's body. Ryan's awareness expanded through the broken node, briefly touching the same framework the registry used to categorize beasts. He did not gain total knowledge, but he could suddenly perceive layers of magical instruction that had been completely invisible before this evolution. When the transformation stopped, the system identified his new form as System Rat and classified him at C rank. Ryan immediately noticed he had skipped D rank entirely, breaking another supposedly fixed rule of Asterra's progression ladder in front of registry experts. The investigators noticed too, and their reaction was much less amused than Ryan's internal response to accidentally unlocking what looked like debug mode. One investigator whispered that the creature had jumped a rank without any registered catalyst capable of causing that kind of evolution. Another stared at the moving runes and said the rat appeared to be interpreting the system instead of merely existing inside it. System Rat did not hand Ryan a readable menu, but nearby spells now carried patterns he could distinguish before they activated. He could sense which rune meant containment, which layer handled identification, and which instructions expected a contracted beast to obey automatically. The information arrived as structure rather than language, like recognizing code architecture without seeing a single line of source. Ryan immediately understood why the new form was more dangerous than a bigger stat increase. Knowledge turned every future rule into a potential attack surface. He also understood why the registry investigators looked frightened, because their entire profession depended on those rules remaining invisible to the creatures inside them. Mia saw the moving runes react whenever an examiner activated a device, and realized Slimy was not simply detecting magic anymore. Ryan could now predict where a spell wanted to connect before the spell itself finished forming, making surprise far harder to achieve against him. He tested nothing openly, keeping the new perception hidden behind stillness while memorizing as much of the examination room's architecture as possible. The only part he could not reduce to system logic was Mia's contract, which looked less like an ownership command the closer he examined it. That anomaly became more important than the C rank label, because their bond appeared to operate through mutual flow rather than one-sided control. Ryan privately described the sensation more simply. Somehow, he had unlocked debug mode. The joke stopped being funny when he realized debug access made him valuable to anyone seeking control over pet contracts. Mia reached toward him after the evolution and asked whether Slimy was still himself beneath the glowing markings. Ryan looked at her, understood every word, and decided, pretending complete animal ignorance had become too cruel. Ryan gave one slow, deliberate nod, making sure Mia understood this was an intentional answer rather than another random animal reaction. Mia froze because random animal behavior could explain many things, but Ryan's deliberate nod was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. She asked again whether he truly understood her, speaking carefully as if the answer might rewrite every conversation they had shared since summoning day. Ryan nodded a second time, and Mia's face crumpled with weeks of emotions she never knew how to interpret. She pulled him against her chest before investigators could react, hugging him hard enough to make Ryan fear structural damage. Through the contract, relief overwhelmed everything else, because Mia finally knew she had never been talking to an empty-minded pet. Ryan felt unexpectedly guilty for hiding his awareness, even though secrecy had been necessary for survival. He had spent weeks analyzing her emotions as progression data while forgetting how terrifying the situation must have been for her. The realization made him feel like the villain in a badly designed tutorial, uncomfortable for someone already reincarnated as vermin. Ryan still refused to reveal reincarnation or human speech, but the simple acknowledgement changed their partnership from educated guessing into real communication. Mia began communicating with yes or no questions whenever privacy allowed, and Ryan answered through controlled gestures that grew more complicated every day. She learned he understood lessons, recognized people, intentionally absorbed magic, and was dramatically more stubborn than a normal pet. Ryan avoided explaining his previous life because a 15-year-old already had enough impossible information to process without learning about another world. More importantly, registry investigators were now convinced the creature possessed cognition far beyond recorded beast behavior, making the anomaly impossible to dismiss. Their reports moved upward through the organization until they reached the one man with the greatest reason to fear an exception. After Mia learned Ryan was truly conscious, their private conversations became awkward, funny, and immediately more useful than weeks of guessing. She started with simple questions about food, pain, fear, and whether he hated the nickname Slimy now that he had evolved 3 times. Ryan answered most of them with nods, shakes, and increasingly complicated paw gestures, while refusing every opportunity to reveal his human origin. Mia quickly realized several past pet instincts had actually been deliberate choices, including the suspiciously convenient help during her academy test. Her stare made Ryan understand that surviving registry interrogation might be easier than explaining why her sentient companion had helped her cheat. Despite that embarrassment, the confirmation strengthened their partnership because Mia no longer had to wonder whether Slimy understood the risks she was taking. Ryan also stopped pretending ignorance around her in private, allowing them to plan tests and exits with far less wasted communication. That new efficiency came at the worst possible time, because the registry's reports were already moving beyond the investigators inside Crownspire. Somewhere above the academy-level bureaucracy, somebody was reading about a C-rank beast that skipped D rank and consumed part of a system node. Ryan did not know the reader's name yet, but the increased security around Mia told him the report had reached someone with real authority. Director Voss had controlled the Celestial Contract Registry for generations, though the public knew almost nothing about his true age. Official records treated him as one administrator among many, but hidden architecture beneath the registry existed largely to preserve his life. Voss had survived 3 centuries by draining EXP and magical growth from powerful contracted beasts moving through the system. Every rank, evolution record, and monitored transfer gave him opportunities to feed without revealing the source of his longevity. He was not merely using the pet contract system, he was one of the architects who helped shape it. That was why reports of a creature consuming system fragments reached him as something more dangerous than an academic anomaly. Ryan's existence represented a beast capable of touching the machinery Voss relied on to remain immortal, not merely another rare evolution worth cataloging. Worse, System Rat had consumed a registry node and evolved by reading the structure hidden inside it, exactly where Voss's authority was most vulnerable. Voss requested every report about Mia, the original summon, Shadow Rat, Void Rat, the tournament, and the broken diagnostic device. By the time Voss finished reading the accumulated reports, curiosity had already turned into obsession, and caution into a plan for acquisition. Ryan knew none of this yet, but the consequences appeared immediately in Crownspire's atmosphere as registry oversight tightened around Mia and Slimy. Registry personnel stopped discussing when the investigation would end and began talking about long-term observation, secure testing, and continued access to Ryan. Mia was asked to remain available for additional testing, while Ryan noticed security increasing around every room they entered. The polite language stayed the same, but the practical reality was obvious. The registry no longer wanted answers. That was the moment Ryan understood the registry was no longer gathering information. It wanted permanent access to him and his evolution route. Ryan began using his new perception to examine the magical arrays surrounding their quarters whenever nobody appeared to be watching. The runes across his body reacted to embedded instructions, allowing him to recognize surveillance spells even when he could not fully decode them. For the first time, he was not merely absorbing the system, he was reading enough of its behavior to predict what it wanted. That capability frightened Ryan, because every improvement made Asterra resemble his old design philosophy more closely, right down to hidden exception logic. Hidden routes, rank skipping, emotional triggers, system consumption, and debug-like perception were no longer isolated coincidences Ryan could explain away. Ryan remembered the Void Devourer he had created before dying, especially its final progression route beyond standard classifications. The boss became stronger whenever enemies tried to control it through system-defined mechanics. Every restriction became food. Every magical rule became exploitable structure, and eventually the monster evolved outside the game's framework. Ryan had considered the design excessive even before testers complained that fighting it felt like arguing with the developer directly. Now, he was starting to suspect the same architecture existed inside his own body, moving him toward the boss he once designed. Mia noticed his unease and asked whether the registry was dangerous enough that they should stop cooperating with the investigation. Ryan hesitated before nodding because he had no proof of a specific plan, only patterns learned from systems built around control. Mia became frightened but did not panic, instead asking whether Crownspire's instructors could protect them if the registry pushed too far. Ryan gave an uncertain gesture, because the academy itself appeared subordinate to registry authority whenever senior investigators entered the building. They settled on caution, staying together and avoiding unnecessary demonstrations while searching for a safer way to understand the situation. Before Voss appeared, Crownspire changed in small ways that Ryan noticed long before Mia did. New wards, restricted corridors, and unfamiliar staff near exits. None of the measures openly targeted them, which made the pattern more suspicious because good containment rarely announced itself as containment. Ryan used system rat perception to watch surveillance spells settle around their route to class and disappear whenever ordinary students moved through. Mia asked whether they were being watched, and Ryan answered with one slow nod that erased any remaining illusion of a routine investigation. They began staying in crowded areas, avoiding isolated testing rooms, and keeping every conversation about Slimy's abilities deliberately vague. Ryan considered escape, but the permanent contract meant running without understanding registry reach could place Mia in more danger rather than less. The smartest move was gathering information while appearing cooperative. A strategy Ryan hated because it required letting hostile people choose the tempo. That tension peaked when senior instructors were ordered to clear an entire hall for one visitor arriving directly from registry headquarters. Mia recognized the name Director Voss from school records, but Ryan reacted to the deference around him more than the title itself. The man walked into Crownspire, smiling politely, and Ryan immediately understood why everyone else in the building had stopped making independent decisions. That safer opportunity never came because Director Voss arrived at Crownspire personally, ending any hope that the anomaly case would remain routine. His appearance caused immediate deference among faculty, confirming his authority before Mia even heard the full title attached to his name. Voss looked far younger than 3 centuries should allow, carrying himself with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to obedience. Voss spoke gently to Mia, praised her unusual bond, and examined Ryan without touching him or wasting time pretending Slimy was ordinary. Ryan disliked him instantly because Voss's eyes did not contain curiosity. They contained the calculation of someone evaluating an asset. Most investigators studied Ryan like an unexplained beast, while Voss studied him like material whose extraction method had not been selected. The difference was subtle enough that Mia almost missed it, but their contract carried Ryan's tension directly to her. Voss asked whether System Rat could absorb stronger magic than Crownspire had tested, turning a polite conversation into a deliberately targeted probe. Mia answered carefully that she did not know, while Ryan remained completely still on her shoulder and watched every movement Voss made. Voss released the faintest controlled thread of energy toward Ryan without warning, testing the absorption mechanic before Mia could refuse. The void instinct swallowed it instantly, and the runes across Ryan's body flashed as they interpreted the unfamiliar structure. Voss smiled, but whatever sat behind that smile made Ryan miss the comforting ignorance of Summoning Day and its simple F- problems. The director had confirmed something he wanted, and confirmation made people more dangerous than curiosity ever could when they possessed institutional power. Ryan spent the rest of the meeting studying Voss's mana through the tiny sample he had absorbed, searching for what made it feel wrong. Something about Voss's mana felt layered, as though countless foreign growth signatures had been compressed beneath one human aura and forced to coexist. He could not identify the exact mechanic, but the structure resembled energy assembled from many separate contracted beasts. That discovery told Ryan enough to stop thinking of Voss as an administrator. Whatever the director had done to survive this long was directly connected to the progression system governing beasts. Voss eventually left without demanding custody, which made Ryan more suspicious rather than less. Someone with that much authority did not need permission unless he preferred obtaining his target under controlled conditions. Mia asked whether the danger had passed, and Ryan shook his head. Their best defense remained the strategy that carried them from F- to C rank: understand the rules faster than the people enforcing them. Ryan intensified his study of system rat abilities, especially the way the runes reacted to contract structures. He discovered that touching Mia's contract mark allowed him to perceive their connection far more clearly than before. The bond did not resemble a chain or ownership command. It looked like two linked flows continuously supporting each other. That distinction mattered because registry doctrine described humans as masters and beasts as contracted assets rather than equal partners inside the bond. Ryan's perception suggested the underlying system was capable of reciprocity, even if society interpreted it differently for status, control, and convenience. Mia's emotions strengthened him, but his presence also stabilized her magic and protected parts of the contract from outside interference. Their bond had evolved alongside Ryan, making external control increasingly difficult and explaining why ordinary cancellation procedures never worked. Ryan suspected that was one reason the original cancellation attempts had failed before his first transformation, long before anyone recognized his hidden root. Ryan studied their contract repeatedly after Voss left, searching for anything the director could exploit if he decided polite observation was no longer enough. The more Ryan examined it, the stranger the original failed cancellation attempt became, because even basic registry authority had never been able to sever the bond. He began suspecting their connection had changed before his first evolution, possibly because Mia chose to keep him when every adult recommended replacement. That choice would explain why emotional memories mattered so much. The hidden root might be treating reciprocal commitment as a core progression resource. Mia could not see the architecture Ryan saw, but she understood the practical result when he repeatedly pointed to her contract mark and then to himself. The message was simple enough. Whatever Voss wanted, their bond was not behaving like the ownership model the registry expected. That gave them one defensive advantage, but it also explained why Voss kept returning with stronger probes instead of trying an ordinary transfer order. Ryan realized the director was testing where the bond ended and where the hidden evolution route began, searching for a way to separate one from the other. By the final visit, Ryan no longer wondered whether Voss intended to take him. The only unanswered question was what the director would use as leverage. The contract had recognized something unusual between them long before anyone understood what the slime rat could become. He wondered whether the hidden root chose Mia, whether Mia unknowingly chose it, or whether his reincarnated consciousness caused everything. There was no answer, only more evidence that the system contained layers even its official architects did not fully control. Voss returned several times under the excuse of observation, each visit accompanied by stronger magical probes and less convincing claims of routine research. Ryan absorbed as little as possible while quietly learning more about the director's energy and the foreign beast signatures buried inside it. Every sample confirmed the same disturbing pattern. Voss carried fragments resembling countless beast signatures inside his life force. Ryan eventually realized the obvious explanation was also the worst one. The pattern finally became impossible to ignore. Voss had been feeding on contracted beasts and converting their progression into his own lifespan. Mia could not interpret Ryan's full suspicion, but she understood enough from his reactions to distrust the director. She began refusing optional tests, using her status as Ryan's tamer to block procedures whenever Academy rules still protected her. Voss remained patient, which convinced Ryan the man had another method prepared once voluntary testing stopped producing enough useful information. 300 years of survival did not produce impatience. It produced confidence that time, authority, or leverage would eventually remove resistance. Ryan therefore started asking what Voss would do if voluntary access failed, and what pressure point the director considered easiest to exploit. Ryan barely had time to prepare for that possibility, because the answer came much sooner than either of them expected. Mia disappeared between supervised lessons, leaving behind only a disrupted contract pulse and Ryan's immediate understanding that Voss had stopped asking. The moment Mia vanished, their bond stretched painfully instead of breaking, proving she remained alive somewhere beyond Ryan's sight. Panic hit him harder than any evolution because every previous threat had happened while they were together. Ryan abandoned secrecy immediately, released the full range of system rat perception, and searched for disturbances connected to their contract. Hidden magical instructions lit across Crownspire like pathways, many ordinary, several restricted, and one carrying Voss's layered signature. Ryan followed that structure through corridors without waiting for teachers, investigators, or anyone else to understand where he was going. Security spells tried to block Ryan, but the runes across his body identified their patterns before contact and showed where each restriction connected. Instead of attacking barriers normally, Ryan consumed small structural pieces until their restrictions collapsed around him without triggering a full magical detonation. Each broken ward reinforced the terrifying truth that his power now interacted directly with mechanisms designed to enforce authority. Ryan moved faster than his tiny body should allow, driven less by stats than by the contract pulling him toward Mia. The trail led beyond ordinary academy space into a registry-controlled facility prepared long before the kidnapping. Voss had not acted impulsively. He built an environment specifically designed to contain Mia while forcing Ryan to approach. The director understood their bond was the only reliable bait because breaking it might destroy the creature he wanted. Mia was held inside a layered magical chamber surrounded by extraction arrays tied directly into the registry's contract architecture. Voss stood beside her with the calm expression of someone completing a procedure rather than kidnapping a student. His plan was simple. Use Mia's bond to draw Ryan inside, strip away resistance, then absorb the abnormal evolution route into himself. By consuming the void-linked path, Voss believed he could escape the last limits, threatening his 300-year life, and become permanently self-sustaining. Ryan understood the plan almost immediately because System Rat could read portions of the extraction structure and trace where stolen progression was rooted. The arrays were designed to drain contracted growth, perfectly matching the fragmented beast signatures Ryan had sensed inside Voss. This was not just a special trap. It was the same mechanic the director had used repeatedly to sustain himself. Ryan finally saw the hidden cruelty beneath Asterra's elegant ranking system, and the discovery made every polished registry doctrine feel rotten. High-rank beasts were celebrated publicly, recorded obsessively, and monitored through infrastructure that allowed Voss to harvest progression without exposing the theft. The system promising order had become one man's private EXP farm, feeding immortality every time another powerful beast entered its records. Ryan felt rage building, but he stayed analytical because blind anger would deliver exactly what Voss wanted inside a trap built for control. He studied the arrays, Mia's position, the director's magic, and every visible connection before moving deeper into the chamber. Voss welcomed him almost warmly, praising the creature for reaching C rank faster than any known evolution should allow. Ryan remained silent because revealing speech would add drama without improving his tactical position. Voss explained that ordinary beasts were trapped by rank ceilings, while Ryan's absorption offered a route beyond those limits. The director believed consuming that route would make his immortality complete, letting him feed on the system itself instead of dependent beasts. Ryan considered the logic technically coherent and morally disgusting, which reminded him of several monetization meetings from his old career. Mia called for Slimy from inside the restraint field, and the sound shattered Ryan's remaining emotional distance and every attempt at detached analysis. Fear, trust, anger, and desperate relief flooded through their contract all at once, carrying every shared memory into the same overwhelming surge. The bond had accumulated meaningful experiences since summoning day, from humiliation and tears to laughter, training, cheating, and victory. Every shared memory surged together as Mia called the nickname she had given him when he was still the weakest pet in school. Ryan's hidden progression system responded more violently than ever before, as though the bond had finally reached the condition it had been building toward. The accumulated bond reached a threshold no crystal, spell, or consumed beast had ever achieved, and Ryan felt the next route force itself open. At the same time, Ryan's rage supplied an emotional trigger powerful enough to force the next evolution branch open. The system did not offer a gradual step into B rank or a rank, ignoring the normal ladder entirely when the new branch appeared. It reacted as though the normal progression ladder had become irrelevant, because whatever was awakening no longer belonged inside ordinary rank logic. Ryan's C rank body collapsed inward, glowing runes folding into darkness, while the extraction arrays malfunctioned and Voss realized the trap was feeding the evolution. Voss activated the trap immediately, sending centuries of accumulated mana through restraints meant to immobilize any contracted beast. The magic touched Ryan's transforming body and disappeared before completing its command, turning Voss's containment spell into fuel for the evolution. More energy followed, then more, and every new layer became fuel instead of restriction, as the trap accidentally accelerated the transformation. Ryan's outline expanded for the first time, no longer preserving the harmless proportions of a rat, while darkness swallowed the space around him. Darkness spread across the chamber without behaving like shadow, swallowing light around an emerging body too large for any previous form. The luminous system runes did not vanish. They stretched across the growing creature like broken code wrapped around living void. Limbs lengthened, the air distorted, and the surrounding magical architecture bent toward Ryan as if gravity itself had changed. Mia watched from inside the restraint field while the pet, once mocked as lower than trash, became something the registry could not categorize. Ryan's human memories recognized the silhouette before the transformation finished. He had drawn that shape, approved its animations, argued about its mechanics, and spent months balancing encounters around it. The creature taking form inside Asterra was the Void Devourer, the final boss Ryan Park had designed before his death. The realization produced one absurd thought beneath all the fury. He had somehow designed his own final form years early. The system classified the transformation as S rank, skipping B and A without even acknowledging the missing stages. Voss's calm expression finally broke, because even his centuries of knowledge contained no precedent for that kind of rank jump. The director intensified the extraction arrays, drawing on stored power accumulated from countless high-tier contracted beasts. Ryan felt the attacks enter his new void field and instantly understood that the Devourer form had removed earlier absorption limits. Magic no longer needed to strike Ryan, approach him, or even retain recognizable structure before the Void Devourer could begin consuming it. If Ryan could perceive the system carrying an effect, the Void Devourer could start eating the connection itself. Voss launched layered restraints designed to overwrite contract commands, but Ryan consumed the instructions before they reached Mia. Defensive barriers rose around Voss, and Ryan stripped their magical foundations away section by section instead of wasting power attacking the surface. Offensive spells followed, each carrying power accumulated across centuries, yet every attack only expanded Ryan's available energy and revealed another stolen signature. Voss changed tactics by reinforcing his body with stolen beast traits, then stopped throwing obvious spells Ryan could comfortably feed into the void. He feinted with a bright mana burst, waited for Ryan's attention to follow it, then crossed the chamber behind his own collapsing spell. The reinforced fist landed under the Devourer's jaw before Ryan could turn, launching his massive body into a pillar hard enough to fracture glowing runes. Mia felt the impact through their contract and recognized the Ironback lesson again. Deleting magic did not delete momentum. Ryan tried stripping the reinforcement from Voss's next swing, but the director swapped stolen beast traits mid-motion and landed a second body shot. The hit tore a dark seam across Ryan's side, proving Voss had studied the tournament footage and built this physical phase around that known weakness. Ryan adapted with misdirection, and tighter spacing, but the fight no longer felt comfortable. One bad read could still break his new form. That was when Voss stopped chasing damage and began watching the contract line connecting the Devourer to Mia, searching for a more permanent counter. That change bothered Ryan more than another attack, because Voss had finally stopped fighting the monster and started studying what the monster refused to sacrifice. Voss suddenly cut power to half the chamber, then rerouted the extraction arrays away from Ryan and directly into Mia's restraint field. The contract between them flashed, and Ryan felt an unfamiliar second pathway clamp onto the bond like a parasite riding an existing connection. Voss explained that every pet contract had a return channel, a feature the registry normally used to measure growth flowing between tamer and beast. For 3 centuries, he had turned that harmless return channel into the siphon that fed his own immortality. Now, he inverted it again, linking Mia's life force to the same absorption path Ryan had been using against the chamber. Ryan tested the void against one incoming restraint, and immediately understood the trap when Mia dropped to one knee inside the field. The spell vanished, but the counter siphon pulled energy through their bond at the same moment, making Ryan's strongest defense hurt the person he was protecting. For the first time since becoming the Void Devourer, Ryan closed the void voluntarily and let the next attack strike his outer defenses instead. Voss smiled because he had finally found a rule Ryan could not simply eat. Every solution now charged its cost to Mia. A barrage of compressed spells hammered the Devourer's body while Ryan refused to absorb them, tearing dark fragments from his new form one impact at a time. Mia screamed for him to fight back, but Ryan could feel the siphon waiting inside their bond and knew another full absorption might drain her completely. Voss pressed harder, layering physical reinforcement over system restraints, so Ryan had to choose between taking damage and feeding the counter-siphon. The Devourer's massive body crashed into one wall, and for the first time, the final form looked less like a raid boss and more like something cornered. Ryan searched the system structure for a third option, but every path he found either crossed Mia's bond or gave Voss another second to attack. That was when his earlier assumption failed him. Ryan had been treating the contract as something he alone needed to protect. Inside the restraint field, Mia had been studying the same glowing pathways every time Voss activated the siphon. She could not read system code like Ryan, but she could feel one thing perfectly through the bond, which pulse belonged to Slimy, and which one felt foreign. Mia stopped pulling against the restraints and instead pressed her contract mark directly against the nearest control rune anchoring the siphon. Voss ordered her to stop, which told Mia she had finally touched something important enough to scare him. She pushed mana through the contract in the opposite direction, not trying to power Ryan up, but forcing her own signal back into the channel Voss had hijacked. The restraint burned against her hand, yet the foreign pathway flickered because the system suddenly received two conflicting ownership instructions from the same bond. Ryan felt the difference instantly. Mia was not an emotional battery anymore. She was actively contesting the rule Voss had wrapped around them. System rat perception flared inside the Devourer form, highlighting Mia's deliberate pulse as the authentic contract and the siphon as an added layer. Ryan finally saw the exploit. He did not need to absorb the whole bond, only the counterfeit instruction riding on top of it. He opened the void as narrowly as possible and bit into the false return channel, while Mia kept her own signal steady from inside the restraint. Pain shot through both of them, but the siphon peeled away from the contract instead of dragging Mia's energy with it. Voss reacted instantly, throwing a physical strike toward Mia, because breaking her concentration was now more valuable than damaging Ryan. Ryan intercepted the blow with his body, taking the impact directly rather than risking another uncontrolled absorption near the exposed contract line. The hit drove him across the chamber, but Mia stayed conscious and kept one hand locked over the burning control rune. She then tore the weakened restraint cable free and slammed its metal anchor through the flickering node that maintained the reverse siphon. The node cracked, the counterfeit pathway collapsed, and Mia finally created a window Ryan could use instead of simply waiting to be rescued. Voss lost his smile for the first time because the girl he treated as bait had just broken the mechanic that made his counter possible. Ryan's anger returned, but now it had direction. Mia had handled the bond from inside, leaving him free to attack everything outside it. The void reopened, and the next barrage vanished before touching him without pulling even a trace of energy from Mia. Voss abandoned the siphon and unleashed stored abilities faster than before, cycling lightning, barriers, speed boosts, and borrowed armor in overlapping layers. Ryan stopped trying to eat each effect separately and began targeting the shared permission that allowed Voss to call stolen beast power as his own. One layer disappeared, then three others failed with it, proving the abilities were different on the surface, but dependent on the same registry authorization underneath. Voss compensated by activating root-level control through the facility, forcing every remaining array to recognize Ryan as property under emergency registry custody. The command slammed into the Devourer like invisible chains, not damaging his body, but trying to redefine who had authority over his evolution. Ryan could feel the system attempting to classify him, bind him, and root ownership away from Mia toward the registry itself. Mia answered before he did, pressing her bleeding contract mark against her chest, and deliberately reaffirming the bond from her side. The system received two competing claims, centuries of registry authority on one side, and the original voluntary contract between Mia and Ryan on the other. For one dangerous second, neither side won, and Ryan's S-rank form began flickering between stable, void, and forced classification. Voss drove forward physically while the command held, landing a reinforced blow that cracked one of the Devourer's rune-lined limbs. Ryan finally understood the real final boss mechanic. He could not win by being more overpowered than Voss. He had to prove which connection the system considered legitimate. He reached through the contract, not to take strength from Mia, but to send one clear intention back: choose me again. Mia understood without words and closed her hand over the contract mark, consciously accepting Slimy as her companion, exactly as she had after the first summoning. The bond surged, not because she was crying harder, but because both sides actively chose the same connection at the same moment. That mutual signal cut through the registry override like a valid key inside corrupted permissions, exposing the root command Voss had hidden beneath everything else. Ryan attacked that command directly, consuming the ownership instruction instead of the power flowing through it. The invisible chains shattered, and every emergency array in the chamber lost the authority to treat either Ryan or Mia as registry property. Voss staggered because the same root access supporting his stolen abilities had just been severed from the contract network beneath his feet. Ryan followed the break and finally saw the structure linking Voss to 3 centuries of harvested progression stored throughout the facility. The director's immortality was not one giant power source. It was a web of thousands of stolen beast signatures kept alive by registry permissions. Voss tried to sever the oldest links manually, but doing so only exposed which connections mattered most to keeping his body stable. Ryan bit into the first visible thread, and one stored signature vanished so completely that Voss aged several years in a single breath. A second connection disappeared, then a third, stripping away strength, regeneration, and the stolen vitality Voss had treated as permanent property. The director launched desperate spells, but Ryan used each attack like a tracer, following its ownership mark back to another cluster of harvested progression. Mia pulled herself free of the damaged restraint field and moved behind a broken pillar, no longer helpless, but still close enough to keep their contract signal clear. Voss changed targets again, hurling a compressed spear of system mana toward Mia in one last attempt to force Ryan into a bad choice. Ryan opened the void without hesitation. Now that the siphon was gone, erased the spear, and traced its permission straight back into Voss's remaining life network. That pathway revealed the final truth. Voss had become so dependent on stolen progression that separating the network from the man was no longer possible. Ryan hesitated. Anyway, because consuming the system around Voss now meant consuming Voss with it, rather than merely stripping away another ability. Voss used that hesitation to reach for Mia again, proving that after 3 centuries, he still saw every bond as leverage instead of something freely chosen. The choice ended there for Ryan. He expanded the void around Voss and began consuming the entire stolen network from the outside inward, leaving Mia's contract as the only protected connection in the chamber. Centuries of harvested EXP vanished first, followed by defensive permissions, regenerative loops, and ancient mechanisms keeping Voss alive beyond a normal human lifespan. Voss fought the collapse with everything remaining, insisting the system belonged to him because he had spent 3 centuries building the rules everyone obeyed. Ryan's answer existed in the mechanic Voss never understood. A rule only mattered while nobody inside the system could target the rule itself. The Void Devourer stripped away Voss's last external registry permissions, and the director's borrowed age crashed back into the body beneath them. For one instant, Voss looked every stolen year, but instead of collapsing, he triggered a final administrator override buried inside his own life network. Every surviving beast signature compressed inward, no longer forming range spells, but hardening his failing body into one last brutal physical shell. Ryan opened the void automatically and gained almost nothing, because Voss had stopped projecting power and was carrying the stolen reinforcement inside, flesh and bone. Voss crossed the chamber with terrifying speed and drove Ryan through the broken floor, turning the ironback weakness into his final win condition. The Devourer rose slower this time, dark cracks spreading across his ribs, while Mia felt enough pain through the bond to know another clean hit mattered. Mia called the timing instead of his name, warning Ryan whenever Voss's stolen signatures shifted before each burst of physical reinforcement. Ryan followed her rhythm, used shadow misdirection to force one overextension, then targeted only the permission holding Voss's reinforced shoulder together. The arm buckled mid-swing, and system rat perception exposed a chain of emergency permissions Voss had hidden beneath the physical shell. Voss tried rerouting them toward Mia, but she pushed her contract signal back again, blocking the stolen pathway long enough for Ryan to isolate it. Ryan consumed that final permission chain from the outside inward, stripping away the shell, regeneration, and every remaining shortcut keeping Voss alive. Voss reached for Mia one last time, but the hand aged decades before crossing half the distance as the borrowed progression disappeared. The final connection snapped, and Director Voss vanished with the stolen network he had spent 3 centuries treating as his personal immortality. Only then did the system register what Ryan had become. S rank had been exceeded, and an empty symbol appeared beside the words void rank. Ryan almost laughed at the interface admitting it had lost jurisdiction, then the Devourer form collapsed inward before he could enjoy the victory. Darkness and runes folded away until Mia found the same exhausted slime rat she had carried from the summoning hall months earlier. She picked him up, asked whether he was still himself, and received one slow nod before Ryan climbed onto her shoulder like nothing had changed. Registry personnel arrived to find Voss gone, the extraction network shattered, and Mia holding an ordinary-looking rat nose scanner could classify consistently. Recovered records proved Voss had drained high-rank beasts for generations, forcing the registry to confront the system hidden beneath its own legitimate infrastructure. Public report stayed cautious, but rumors moved faster. Some students said Slimy defeated Voss, while others insisted the rat literally ate the director. Ryan preferred the second rumor remain a rumor, because surviving Voss did not make becoming a research specimen any more appealing. Back at Crownspire, one crystal read F rank, another flashed S rank, and a third shut down when Void rank refused to fit its categories. Mia found the broken readings hilarious, while Ryan considered them excellent camouflage for a creature that could still look like the world's worst summon. More importantly, the final battle proved their contract worked both ways. Mia had not powered Ryan from behind, she had fought beside him through it. Their training changed after that, focusing less on chasing evolution and more on communication, positioning, and what each partner could handle alone. Ryan had finally reached a rank beyond the system, yet his new endgame sounded embarrassingly small. Never let Asterra prove Slimy was fully sentient. Mia agreed, since explaining that her pet behaved like a burned-out adult game designer would create questions neither of them wanted. A few evenings later, she studied magical theory at her desk, while Ryan rested beside an enchanted textbook, enjoying the luxury of a normal problem. Mia got stuck on a memory enchantment lesson, so Ryan tapped the page and arranged pens into a crude diagram that explained the concept more clearly. She stared at the diagram, then at Slimy, slowly realizing her supposedly illiterate pet had understood the chapter before his own tamer. Mia informed him that being smarter than her was rude, and Ryan responded by sitting directly on the textbook like a tiny tyrant. She pushed him aside, he climbed back, and the argument ended when Mia laughed hard enough to forget why she had been annoyed. For Ryan, that stupid little moment mattered more than another rank up, because the Void Devourer could still come home and be Slimy. Then Mia left to grab another book, and Ryan noticed a faint enchantment woven through the textbook pages to reinforce stored knowledge. His absorption sense reacted immediately, while the former game designer in him asked the worst possible question: could he eat the spell and learn faster? Common sense recommended waiting for Mia, requesting permission, and testing one harmless corner under controlled conditions, which lasted roughly 3 seconds. Ryan bit the page, felt structured knowledge flicker through his mind, then took a second bite exactly as Mia walked back into the room. He had eaten an immortal and escaped the world's ranking system, but his next boss fight was explaining why Slimy had literally eaten Mia's homework.